Hola, comrades. Today's topic of interest, Pokémon XD, Gale of Darkness. Wait, hold up. How many of you actually remember this game? If you're a younger viewer, you may not. It was the second of two Pokémon games that took place in the Ore region, based on the southwestern United States. The first being Pokémon Colosseum. They were, in a way, the spiritual successors of the Pokémon Stadium games released on the Nintendo 64, but they were also completely different. Despite being similarly named to Stadium, Pokémon Colosseum was an actual game, an actual RPG, not merely an excuse to see your favorite Pokémon in 3 dimensions. You could gawk at how beautiful the Espeon and Umbreon you started with were, especially in comparison to the sprites of the handheld games. But you could also use that Umbreon and Espeon, as well as shadow Pokemon you snagged from Cypher, the region's evil team, to take down Cypher. The Stadium games were fun, but they were destined to remain as colorful side activities. Colosseum, and XD after it, were different. The Stadium games had mini-games. Colosseum and XD had fully fleshed out adventures. These were the first real Pokémon games on a console, and their stories were better than anything the mainline series would come up with until Generation 5. They were everything fans have been saying they want from a mainline Pokémon game. They were dark and even a little morally ambiguous. You're stealing people's Pokémon, but you're doing it for a good reason. Cypher corrupts Pokémon, transforming them into fighting machines. To defeat them, you have to engage in some unsavory behavior of your own. I can easily imagine your main characters in these games being in opposition to the standard goody-two-shoes Pokémon protagonist. In Colosseum, your character is not a child, and they were a member of Team Snag'em, a gang allied with Cypher, until recently. These morally ambiguous elements are cleaned up in XD, but they're still there. In both games, your character is not this scrubbed clean youth determined to complete the Pokédex. They're outright vigilantes, stepping in because the authorities were unable to stop the threat. And in both games, traditional systems of authority are compromised by Cypher. There's this sense of burden and desolation that is absent from the rest of the series, even at its darkest. No one is coming to save you if you mess up. Right from the beginning, it's not about a journey to find oneself. It's about setting aside one's personal desires because of a moral need to change a corrupt system. That's genuinely interesting, and if nothing else, it's a welcome turn from the ordinary Pokémon series, and it shows Nintendo was willing to take risks on side projects long before the main series began to grudgingly, reluctantly, move from the tired dogma that had defined it since its inception. So why is it that no one remembers these games? It wouldn't be right to say these games completely flopped. I'd give my right arm to sell 1 million copies of anything. But they didn't move as much material as the mainline Pokémon games, and so the series was not continued past Generation 3, and it has mainly been forgotten by Nintendo. Allow me to go off on a bit of a tangent here, and assert that Generation 3 was the most creative the franchise has ever been. I don't mean with the main series games, though the decision to not use old Pokémon for Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald was gutsy to say the least. I mean with the spin-offs. Pokémon Snap has garnered critical acclaim as the neglected spin-off that deserves a sequel. But while I appreciate Snap for its low-key, almost relaxing nature and surprisingly immersive gameplay, the Pokémon Ranger and Pokémon Mystery Dungeon franchises, both started in Generation 3, have longer-lasting appeal. Technically, they're still making Pokémon Mystery Dungeon games, but the series receives nowhere near the same buzz it did when it started. When Generation 3 began, Nintendo was flush with money from the Pokémon franchise, so they threw all the ideas they had into the gaming marketplace. The result was the most fecund period in the franchise. Now, I understand that the company is more cautious. They don't invest as heavily in spin-offs because they know it's the main games that make the most money. The spin-offs they do create are those intended to appeal to a more casual audience, such as the wildly successful Pokémon Go. However, the news isn't all bad. The Switch, Nintendo's new platform intended to replace both handheld and console systems, has been a wild success, partially thanks to the intuitive concept of the system, and partially thanks to a delectable slate of games. It has performed beyond the wildest imaginations of critics and supporters alike, so it shouldn't be a surprise that a mainline Pokémon game is going to be released for it. But it is a surprise. For decades, fans have been arguing that there should be a mainline Pokémon game on a console, and we're finally on the precipice of that. Okay, I can hear you saying, that's all fine and dandy, but what does that have to do with Gale of Darkness? To which I answer, Nintendo should use these games, Gale of Darkness and Colosseum, as a model for what they should do with their new Pokémon game for the Switch. Making a 3D game is inherently different from making a 2D game. 2D games tend to focus more on sheer gameplay, while 3D games tend to focus more on world building, and not just world building even, but the presence of the world, the atmosphere, the ambiance. There are 2D games that do this well, such as Undertale, but the Pokémon series hasn't been able to do this, even as it's converted to 3D. That isn't to say that there aren't some elements of presence that Pokémon excels at. It's great at music, for one. Listen to some of its best tracks, like Canalave City at Night, or Lumio City, or Accumula Town. And it's great at making streets and cities or even roads and caverns bulge with life. It's great at making each and every area feel unique, but they have no sense of space or scale. The cities feel different from one another, yes, but they don't have a lot of personality. Pokemon is still locked into the old trap of crafting areas as places to collect items and complete objectives, instead of places to experience the essence of a section of a world. 2D games can get away with this. 3D games cannot, especially not if they're on consoles, especially not if they're open world, which there is every reason to believe this next Pokemon game will be. There are many examples on how to do an open world game correctly, many of them, conveniently, provided by Nintendo. There's Breath of the Wild, there's Super Mario Odyssey, there are the Xenoblade games. All of these games understand that exploration isn't about collecting items and getting into fights. It's about experiences. It's about being sent into awe as you gaze upon a cascading waterfall. It's about your eyes popping wide as you stumble upon plants you've never seen before. It's about noticing birds off in the distance in the desert, completing long, arcing laps over the region. It's about feeling the immense power and majesty of a city as you enter its gates, the sense that it's been there for centuries and probably will be there for centuries more. It's about noticing the ground shaking as a volcano rumbles off in the distance and then realizing that you'll have to go to that volcano. It's about seeing a faraway cliff and jumping with giddy glee at the knowledge that you'll be able to get to the top. It's about staring out at the vast world sprawling out before you and taking comfort in how new of a phenomenon this is, how you could not have been able to do this in the early days of gaming, not even in your wildest dreams. Pokémon Colosseum and Pokémon XD Gale of Darkness are not open world games. In fact, they are less open world than even a typical mainline Pokémon game, which may have been one of the reasons why these games never sold as well as the mainline Pokémon games. The more major reason, of course, is that they broke hard from the traditional Pokémon dogma, which is about going out and collecting Pokémon in grass and caves and sand, and using them to collect badges. There are no badges to collect in these games, and in Pokémon Colosseum, there are 0 wild Pokémon, while in Gale of Darkness, there are only a few, and they are infuriating to catch. What these games do have is a talent for ambiance and atmosphere, which is why they're worth looking into even though they're not open world games themselves. These games take place in a world of dust and dirt, which allows for the elegant, gleaming cities and structures to be juxtaposed to it. Realgum Tower is a shiny, superfluous white spire rising up out of the desert. It honestly reminds me of a Vegas mega casino resort. Phoenix City, very obviously based on Phoenix, Arizona, is an oasis amidst the desert. It is the only major city in this region, and it is typically brimming with life, even when dark secrets lie beneath its sunshiny exterior. Then there's the Shadow Pokémon Lab, a highly advanced facility with smooth lines, sleek corridors, and music that combines two things that should absolutely not work together, bluesy harmonicas and electro, into a catchy, tuneful melody. What's interesting is that these advanced areas are all the domain of the criminals. The areas that look the cleanest are actually the filthiest. Ironic, isn't it? Nothing is ever as it seems here. In Gale of Darkness, you meet a kindly old man in the bustling Gattian port, only for him to later be revealed as Grand Master Greevil, the boss of Cypher. This region is cohesive in a way that Pokémon regions in the handheld games are not. The components fit together, they tell a story by themselves. An open-world Pokémon game should organize its region in the same way. But that's not all. Colosseum is rough around the edges. I like it a lot, but it's a clumsy, limited game that never quite delivers on the promise of its ideas. That's not the case with XD, Gale of Darkness, which reigned as my favorite game of all time for several years of my childhood. I don't like it quite as much as I did then, but it's still an absolute masterpiece. Throughout my teenage years, I wondered why I liked the game as much as I did, but over time I've realized that the large part of it comes down to ambiance. When you're in Gattian Port, you can almost feel the harsh sunlight on your skin. You can almost smell the sea. That's how visceral this area feels. There's no disconnect between you and it. The music is lively and chipper. It feels less like one on a list of locations you have to visit, and more like a genuine port area, swamped by a few tourists, but not too many, with a colorful restaurant scene, and a few seedy thugs whom you're best to avoid. Looking at it on a map, it seems so small, so insignificant, but actually playing it in the game, it feels so immense, so expansive, so enjoyable. But that's not even my favorite piece of ambiance. I love the austere, howling winds as you prepare to handle the Cypher Key lair. I love the water rushing down in Phoenix Coliseum, a serene detail juxtaposed with the ominous takeover of the city by Cypher. I love watching the lava course in the game's final area, Set to Dark Isle. I like a lot about Set to Dark Isle, actually. It's one of the best final areas in any game. There are a lot of layers to go through, but it doesn't feel overly gamey, like they've set up traps just to foil you. It's the secret lair of an evil, wealthy criminal organization. There's something beautiful about the lair they've constructed, something firm and respectable, but that doesn't mean it's not also dark and twisted. It's an extremely well-designed area. I particularly love how it feels to be marching to the inner sanctum. There's the spooky red tint, and ahead of you, far ahead of you, is a giant orb. This is the core, but it is guarded, and there is much you have to do before you can even get to it. But you can see it looming out ahead of you, this great evil at the heart of the volcano. It's magnificent. These games demonstrate mastery of atmosphere. When Nintendo makes its Switch Pokémon game, it should look to Xenoblade and Zelda and Mario, yes, but it should also look to Gale of Darkness. Getting to talk about a game I love never gets boring. I haven't played this one in a while though. I should go back to it. It raised the Pokémon series in the eyes of childhood me from merely great to utterly fantastic. I played this game for as long as any mainline Pokémon game, and I have a litany of results to show for it. This was the first game I ever 100%ed. I caught all the Shadow Pokémon, purified Shadow Lugia, and beat Mount Battle. In doing so, I was first introduced to the joys of the experience share, which I kept on my Vaporeon throughout my adventure. Consequently, she was the first Pokemon I ever raised up to level 100. I don't think there's ever a single Pokemon in existence that I've used as much as I used that Vaporeon. So yeah, it's great to re-examine a game I've always loved and see what advice it can offer us for the future, especially if it's a game not a lot of younger gamers know about. This one has been forgotten in the annals of gaming history, but that shouldn't be. It ought to be remembered. This game, and to a lesser extent Colosseum, are prime examples of what Pokemon is capable of when it's not catering to the status quo. As much as I love games like Sun and Moon that reform the status quo, it's nice to see games like these that completely subvert it. Also, while the story isn't on the same level as that of Sun and Moon or Black and White, it's surprisingly heartfelt, and the ending caught me completely off guard as a kid. So if you liked what you saw today, consider donating to my Patreon so I can produce even more shimmering content. Also, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that ultra beautiful stuff. Adios, comrades!